Have you ever stopped to think about how the apps on your phone actually get made? You know, how they go from just an idea to this polished thing you use every day? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the secret recipe, the master blueprint that turns those ideas into reality. We're talking about the software development lifecycle. Let's get into it. So, seriously, how does it happen? How does that spark of an idea, maybe something you scribbled on a napkin, actually become a working app on millions of phones? It's not magic, I promise you. It's a very deliberate, very structured process, and we're going to break it all down. The answer to that big question, well, it really comes down to just 4 letters: SDLC. This is the foundation, the bedrock of how all modern software gets built. It's kind of like the universal language that development teams speak, no matter where they are in the world. So, SDLC stands for Software Development Lifecycle, and here's the best way to think about it. You wouldn't build a house without a detailed blueprint, right? Of course not. You'd need a plan. The SDLC is exactly that, but for software. It's a step-by-step process that guides a project from just a concept all the way to the finished product, making sure nothing important gets missed. At its very core, the SDLC is made up of these 5 fundamental stages. First, you have requirement analysis. That's just figuring out what you're supposed to build. Then comes design, which is planning out how you're going to build it. Next up, the fun part, development, or the actual coding. After that, and this is crucial, you have testing to make sure it all works like it's supposed to. And finally, you release it into the wild and keep it running smoothly with deployment and maintenance. Believe it or not, every piece of software you've ever used has gone through these steps in one way or another. Okay, so we know the steps, but how do teams actually, do them? They use different models or methodologies. Let's start with the original, the classic, the OG approach, the waterfall model. The name waterfall is absolutely perfect because it tells you everything you need to know. Just picture an actual waterfall. The process only flows one way, down. You have to completely finish one phase, like requirement analysis, before you can drop down to the next phase, design. And here's the most important part. You can't go back up. It is a one-way trip, no turning back. Now, this one-way street leads to a pretty big trade-off. On the one hand, the waterfall model is super disciplined and really easy to understand and manage. It's actually great for small projects where you know exactly what you need right from the get-go. But, and this is a huge but, its biggest weakness is that it's completely inflexible. If a client changes their mind halfway through, you're basically out of luck. And worse, a mistake you make in an early phase can create a total disaster later on. Yeah, that lack of flexibility was a massive problem. And it forced people to ask a new question. What if requirements are supposed to change? How do we build something that can adapt on the fly? The answer was a totally new kind of blueprint, one built for evolution, the spiral model. This new way of thinking is what we call iterative. It means you work in cycles. So instead of one long waterfall, you build the product in these repeating loops or spirals. The core idea is super simple. Build a small, working version of the product, get it out there, see what people think, and then you start a whole new cycle to improve it and add more stuff. You experience this all the time with the apps on your phone. You don't just get one perfect version on day 1, right? You get version 1.0. Then, a little while later, you get an update for 2.0 with some new features. Then comes 3.0 with bug fixes and more improvements. Every single one of those updates is the result of another trip around that development spiral. The product is just constantly evolving. So this model is absolutely perfect for those big, complex projects where you know for a fact that requirements are going to shift over time. If you're building a product that's going to have lots of different versions, like an operating system or a major app, the spiral approach is pretty much designed for that journey of continuous improvement. All right, so we have a rigid model and a flexible one. But what if your number one priority isn't just getting it done, but getting it done perfectly? What if quality is absolutely everything? Well, that brings us to our third blueprint, the V model. So how does this model get so obsessed with quality? Well, the genius of the V model is its symmetry.
If you look at it, it forms the letter V. And for every single step you take on the way down to build the product, you plan a corresponding step to test it on the way back up. Development and testing are basically partners, holding hands from the very beginning.
This whole philosophy really boils down to two key questions. On the left side of the V, we have verification, which asks, are we building the product right? This is all about checking the blueprints, the plans, the documents. Then on the right side, we have validation, which asks, are we building the right product? This is where you test the final result to make sure it actually solves the real problem for the customer. The big, huge takeaway here is that with the V model, testing is no longer just some afterthought you tack on at the end. It's woven into the entire process. By testing both the documents and the software as you go, you find bugs so much earlier, and finding bugs early makes them dramatically cheaper and easier to fix. It's a game changer.
So we've seen three really distinct approaches: the rigid waterfall, the flexible spiral, and the quality-focused V model. Okay, so which one's the best? Well, let's put them all side by side and see. This table really puts it all into perspective. You can see that clear trade-off. Waterfall is simple but has very low flexibility. Spiral is highly flexible, perfect for those big evolving products. And then you've got the V model, which is kind of in the middle on flexibility, but is the absolute champion when quality is the #1 goal. We're talking medical software, aviation systems, places where failure is simply not an option. And this, right here, is the ultimate takeaway. There is no single best SDLC model. It just doesn't exist. The most successful teams don't just pick one and stick to it forever. No, they look at the project's goals, its size, its complexity, and then they choose the blueprint that is right for that specific job.
So I'll leave you with a question to think about. If you had the next billion-dollar app idea right now, which of these blueprints would you trust to bring it to life? Would you go for discipline, flexibility, or quality above all else? The choice you make could really determine everything. Something to chew on. That's all for this explainer. Thanks so much for joining us.